We're talking about refined question list for pedagogical bridging. Foundational translation questions. On the 8 functions as a shared vocabulary, both systems use TI, TE, FI, FE, SI, SE, NI, NE, but they organize them differently. For someone trained in one system trying to understand the other, what does the same function actually mean across these frameworks? If someone says, I use extroverted thinking, what additional precision does OPS add to that statement? What does Jung's framing add that OPS might miss? Okay, the trick here is that they use a shared vocabulary, but OPS introduces a more contextual grain of intellectual property. They didn't have to go very far. All they had to do was take a splitter's perspective. See, I'm backwards rationalizing the theory since they haven't described, well, what instantiates the differentiation of a type into modality. No, they're saying they're typing people. In order to come up with the same or similar type, they have to come up with these mechanisms of differentiation, linguistically and structurally, in terms of a technique. We're talking about theory right now, not technique. They're focused mainly on technique. So when it comes to theory, it's on us to say, hey, they haven't done the due diligence yet to instantiate theory. Right now they're talking about the 8 psychological functions. They're viewing them from a splitter's perspective. If you're familiar with this lumpers versus splitters distinction in theory of mind work, what's in the sciences, they're taking a splitter's conceptualization on the 8 functions. That means everything that Jung said is valid. It's real, it's true, it's ontologically rigid, it's correct, except instead of 8, we're splitting them into 16. Instead of TI, it's no longer TI. TI doesn't exist anywhere in existence, in reality, in a psychological type specifically. It does not exist in a psychological type in and of itself anymore. It exists as feminine TI or masculine TI. There is no in between. There is no flattening the expression. It does not exist within a psychological type in the objective personality system. That goes for all 8 of the psychological functions. They take a splitter's frame on all 8, so they no longer exist in the constitution of a person's psyche as a reflection of their psychological type. So for someone trained in one system trying to understand the other, what does the same function actually mean across these frameworks? It means that Jung did the due diligence to talk about the attitude orientation combined with the function of consciousness. He's in various of his works, he talked about breaking down, okay, what it is versus what it does versus how it feels versus what the impression is. We're talking about different ways of thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition. Actually breaking down the function of consciousness into its constituent part. Talking about, hey, there's a dichotomy between judgments and perceptions. There's a dichotomy between decisions and observations. Talking about there's a distinction between thinking and feeling. There's a distinction between sensation and intuition, and modularizing those concepts in the form that we know of today. Meaning, okay, so now it's TI. Why? Because we said we started with a function of consciousness. We said, well, there are these things, there's these linguistic reifications, there's these linguistic attributes out in the world, and we're going to reify them, we're going to hypostatize them as functions of consciousness. We're saying there's a thing called thinking out there, and we're going to talk about its effect phenomenologically. There's a thing called feeling out there, and we're going to talk about its cause and its effect. And again, we're going for cause and effect, but this is from an energic perspective. That means it is taken from a final cause perspective instead of a formal causal perspective. It's a antinomy in terms of the validity of each position. So it's just as sound as a causal mechanism. So in this context, we're saying, hey, what does it actually mean across these frameworks? If someone says, I use extroverted thinking, what additional precision does OPS add to that statement? The additional precision that OPS adds to that statement is that they would imply that you're not really using extroverted thinking. You think you're using extroverted thinking, but what you're really using is another function, one of the 16 functions. It might be feminine extroverted thinking, it might be masculine extroverted thinking, but it's not extroverted thinking in isolation. Why? Because that's not what we're typing for. We cannot type for a function in isolation. It's either masculine or feminine in the type code when we're going through the notation process of how they deploy their technique to isolate the coins necessary to come to a final formulation about what a psychological type looks like as a reflection of people's behavior. So what does Jung's framing add that OPS might miss? It adds a stronger technical layer. A technical layer that includes, okay, so we talked about moving from a function of consciousness to this observer-decider split, this perception split, this judgment split, but then Jung added the attitude orientation in relation to this. That was a huge clue and a cue, because instead of just saying, oh, that's thinking, oh, that's feeling, oh, that's sensation, oh, that's intuition, he anchored it with an attitude orientation as a reflection of someone's libido, as a reflection of psychic energy. He said that person is using introverted thinking. No, that person is using extroverted thinking. And that attitude orientation gave us a modularity. It gave us the theory behind the directionality of the function itself in terms of its psychic energy, how it uses psychic energy, how it metabolizes psychic energy. What is the direction of the libido? Is it towards the object or is it towards the subject? It is coming from an epistemological object-subject differential off the basis, off the backstop. So it's using that as a theoretical posit in its constitutive ordering, in its constitutional frame of reference in terms of where it's going and how we can anchor these functions. So what that does, now that we have a function of consciousness plus an attitude orientation, it gives us the original 8. And that original 8, in terms of adaptation and compensation, they combine with 3 other functions. So you have 1 most differentiated, 2 most differentiated, 3 most differentiated, and 4 most differentiated. From 1 being most differentiated to 4 being least differentiated. In that context, we're able to ascertain a psychological type based on adaptation and compensation. For the extroverted thinking type, that would include an ESTJ and an ENTJ. Why? Because of the functions that they use that make up the type. But in the objective personality system, remember, those functions don't exist anymore. We're operating at a different level of resolution, a level of resolution that includes the 16 functions as a result of them taking a splitter's perspective and splitting each function, each piece of culture commentary, social science theory, and culture commentary that Jung utilized to come up with an instantiation for each of those 8 functions: the TI, the TE, the FI, the FE, the SI, the SE, the NI, the NE. We're taking all of that information and we're taking it from a splitter's perspective. We're splitting it down the middle in terms of masculine polarity and a feminine modality, a masculine modality and a feminine modality. They call them the sexual modalities. This is internal language. We don't know right now what it necessarily has to do with theory, but they're taking this splitter's perspective because it helps them to type people. They are not able to type people at whatever level of resolution without this as a core ontological point of reference. So it's saying that theory applies to practice. They're saying that technique applies to theory. So we're backwards rationalizing theory based on the technique that they've deployed in order to be able to type people. So they're saying that these are actionable things in people's psyches. When they're talking about the masculine extroverted thinking, they're like, that has a specific weight, that has a texture, that has a feel. When they're talking about feminine extroverted thinking, that has a weight, that has a texture, that has a feel. It's different. It's ontologically different from the core basic 8 function provenance. So that is what does the same function actually mean across these frameworks. That's exactly what these functions mean. For someone trained in one system trying to understand the other, what does the same function actually mean across these frameworks? Again, the 8 psychological functions no longer exist in the objective personality system. Now they're characterized by their modality, and their modality ontologically creates a primacy for that function's existence in relation to its modality. So it splits it as a characterization. It's no longer 8 functions, it's now 16. Why? Because we're taking a splitter's perspective. Everything that Jung did to study and to formalize the theory of a specific psychological function, from TE to FE to SI to NE, we're taking that and we're splitting all of the work done, and we're saying, okay, it's the same thing, except now you have a masculine modality and now you have a feminine modality. And then it's about us, it's on us to rationalize, well, what characteristics in terms of typing do we see as differences, and how does that relate to the actual theory of what the function is? They've been working at the layer of technique in order to be able to type people. I'm telling you, we're trying to operate on the level of theory. And that's what additional precision OPS adds to the statement. If someone says, I use extroverted thinking, that's the information I would pass forward. And what does Jung's framing add that OPS might miss? It might miss the theoretical notion underlying everything. The intersection between an attitude orientation and the function of consciousness. How does the difference between an attitude orientation related to, we're sending culture commentary, we're flying in this direction, we're talking about TE versus TI. Okay, we're talking about thinking. What type of thinking? Extroverted thinking. Okay, so the direction of the libido is focused towards the object. So the thinking function is oriented towards the object. What does that mean? And then going through the theory about that, and the theory about the function itself versus the theory about the types that the function is associated with. And then same thing with TI. Okay, a person's using TI. What is that theory behind an introverted attitude orientation oriented towards the subject in relation to thinking? And then we take that a step further and we say, okay, since that does not exist anymore in the objective personality framework, then what is feminine TE? What is masculine TE? What is feminine TI? What is masculine TI? And how does that relate to the attitude orientation? How does that relate to the conceptualization of what a function is? These are questions that still have to be answered, but that's why we do theory in terms of theory, structure, and applications / practice. So on the 8 functions as a shared vocabulary, that is what the functions are, and that is what it means to use the different functions in the different systems.